The beast loomed before him, massive and terrifying in the red emergency lights. 7 feet tall with 8 powerful limbs covered in armored scales that gleamed like wet obsidian. Its body pulsed with bioluminescent patterns, electric blue rings that spiraled down its spine and along each powerful appendage. Jack Mason stood his ground, his weathered hands steady despite the screaming alarms and the creature's enormous bulk filling the narrow corridor. 60 years of life had taught Jack that running from predators only triggered the chase instinct. So he didn't run. He didn't even reach for the emergency alarm on his belt. Instead, he studied the creature's eyes, not the mindless predatory gaze he expected, but something that reflected intelligence, pain, and wariness. The creature tilted its massive head, regarding Jack with something almost like curiosity. A low-frequency rumble emanated from deep within its chest cavity, vibrating the metal floor beneath Jack's boots. "I guess we're both having a hell of a day," Jack said softly, the words slipping out before he could stop them. And somehow, against everything Jack Mason knew about the universe, the creature's bioluminescent patterns shifted from threatening blue to a softer, pulsing green. 24 hours earlier, tracing his finger along a hairline crack in the coolant pipe, Jack Mason shook his head. The fluorescent lights of Horizon Station's maintenance level cast harsh shadows across his face, deepening the lines earned through 60 years of hard living. 20 of those years had been as a Navy SEAL until a mission went south and the brass needed someone to blame. Now he was just another aging maintenance tech at the United Nations Deepwater Research Facility, 40 miles off the Florida coast. "Gonna need a complete replacement on Section 4, Jack called out to no one in particular. The younger techs had already fled to the upper levels at the first hurricane warning. Typical. When things got tough, everyone disappeared, leaving the old man to handle the real work. The intercom buzzed to life. "Mason, what's your status down there?" The voice belonged to Director Harris, a bureaucrat with soft hands and a fancy degree who'd never set foot in the maintenance levels. Jack thumbed the comm switch. "Documenting the maintenance issues you people have been ignoring for the last 6 months. You know, the ones I've filed 17 reports about." A pause. "We have a Category 4 hurricane approaching. All non-essential personnel are evacuating. The last transport leaves in 30 minutes. Jack snorted. "Non-essential. That's me, all right." He stared at the tangle of pipes above him. "Someone needs to secure these systems before that storm hits, or you'll have bigger problems than a little water damage." "Mason." The director's voice had that tone Jack recognized from countless superior officers. Exasperation mixed with reluctant acknowledgement that the difficult old bastard was right. "I'll catch the next transport. Tomorrow or the day after, once I've made sure your billion-dollar underwater research palace doesn't implode." Jack released the comm button before Harris could object. Slinging his tool bag over his shoulder, Jack made his way through the labyrinth of maintenance tunnels. The station creaked around him as the first outer bands of the hurricane passed overhead. The Horizon was built to withstand extreme weather, supposedly. But Jack had seen too many unsinkable ships and impenetrable fortresses fail when theory met reality. As he rounded the corner into the main corridor, a slim figure in a lab coat nearly collided with him. "Whoa there, Doc." Jack steadied the woman by her shoulders. Eleanor Walsh, head of the Deep Marine Biology Department, straightened her glasses and brushed a strand of silver-streaked hair behind her ear. At 58, she carried herself with the determined posture of someone who'd spent decades fighting to be taken seriously. "Mr. Mason," she acknowledged with a nod, "you're still here. Someone's got to make sure this tin can doesn't spring a leak." Jack studied her face. "You missing the evacuation too, I see." Eleanor's eyes flickered toward the research wing. "I have specimens that can't be left unattended. Highly sensitive organisms from the Marianas Trench. The automated systems aren't adequate." Jack had worked alongside Eleanor for nearly 5 years. Unlike most of the scientists who treated the maintenance crew like invisible furniture, she always acknowledged him, remembered his name, even asked about his weekend occasionally. More importantly, she actually listened when he offered suggestions about the environmental systems for her specimens. "Harris won't like that," Jack commented. A flash of defiance crossed her features. "Director Harris approved 3 months of research funding for these specimens, and I'm not abandoning them because of some rain." Jack's mouth twitched in amusement. Category 4 hurricanes were a bit more than some rain, but he appreciated her grit. The overhead lights flickered as a deep rumble passed through the station. "That doesn't sound good," Eleanor muttered, glancing upward. "Storm's getting closer. Main power might get dicey." Jack adjusted his tool bag. I was heading to check the backup generators. Want to make sure your critters stay comfortable. I'll come with you, she said, falling into step beside him. I need to check the containment systems anyway. They walked in companionable silence through the corridors. Most of the station's lights had dimmed to emergency settings, casting everything in a muted blue glow. Through the occasional viewport, Jack could see the ocean outside growing increasingly turbulent, white-capped waves visible even at their depth of 200 feet. The generator room hummed with energy as Jack began his inspection routine. Eleanor stood nearby reviewing something on her tablet. So what are these specimens that are worth riding out a hurricane for? Jack asked as he checked connection points and fuel levels. Eleanor hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. Have you heard of abyssal titans? Jack paused. Those deep-sea predators the military got all worked up about a few years back, thought those were classified. They are. Eleanor's voice dropped lower. But I've been granted special research access. We have one specimen, the only one in captivity. Jack whistled low. Those things are supposed to be nasty. Wasn't there an attack on a submarine near the Marianas Trench? Eleanor's expression hardened. That's the official story. My research suggests otherwise. These creatures display signs of high intelligence, possibly even sentience. But the military-industrial complex would rather frame them as monsters to justify their deep-sea weapons programs. The bitterness in her voice surprised Jack. Dr. Walsh usually maintained professional detachment. You sound like you've got a personal stake in this, he observed. She met his eyes. I've spent my career being dismissed as the crazy old lady who thinks fish can think. When I proposed that certain deep-sea creatures might have advanced neural networks comparable to dolphins or higher primates, I was laughed out of 3 research symposiums. Her fingers tightened around her tablet. But I was right, and our Titan specimen may prove it once and for all. The station shuddered violently, interrupting their conversation. Warning lights flashed as the main power fluctuated. The backup generators kicked in with a mechanical whine. That's our cue. Jack slammed the generator access panel shut and tightened the bolts. We need to get to the command center, now. They hurried through darkening corridors as the station's emergency systems engaged. By the time they reached the command center, most of the screens showed warning indicators. Outer protective barriers holding at 89%, Jack read from the main display. Wave heights exceeding 40 feet. This is going to be a rough one. Eleanor rushed to a separate terminal, pulling up the status of the research containment areas. Environment systems for the specimens are on backup power, holding steady for now. A thunderous boom shook the station, followed by the wail of emergency sirens. Jack's fingers flew across the control panel. Hull breach in Section 12, automated containment doors closing. That's near the Titan's habitat, Eleanor said, her face paling. Jack scanned the readouts. Breach is contained, but we've got power fluctuations throughout that section. He grabbed a portable diagnostic kit, an emergency toolkit from a wall cabinet. I need to get down there and secure those systems before we lose containment integrity. I'm coming with you, Eleanor insisted, already heading for the door. Doc, it's not safe. It's my specimen, Mr. Mason, and I know more about the containment requirements than you do. Jack recognized that tone. Arguing would waste precious time they didn't have. Fine, but you stay behind me and do exactly as I say. I didn't survive 20 years as a SEAL by taking unnecessary risks. The journey to the research wing was treacherous. Twice they had to detour around sealed containment doors, navigating through maintenance ducts Jack normally used for accessing hard-to-reach systems. The hurricane's fury transmitted through the station's structure, making the metal groan and shudder around them. The research wing housed the station's most valuable specimens, deep-sea creatures collected at enormous expense and risk. Most were kept in standard containment units with thick, transparent walls. But at the far end of the wing stood a massive reinforced chamber with military-grade security measures in opaque walls. That's where you're keeping this Titan, Jack asked as they approached. Eleanor nodded, rushing to the control panel beside the chamber. Containment at 72% and falling, she reported, her voice tight with worry. Environmental systems failing. Jack connected his diagnostic kit to the main power junction. The surge protectors are fried. Hurricane must have caused a power spike. He dug into his toolkit, pulling out replacement components. I can bypass the damaged sections, but it'll take a few minutes. We might not have a few minutes, Eleanor warned, eyes fixed on the rapidly declining numbers. As Jack worked, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool air, Eleanor opened a secure cabinet and removed a tranquilizer gun. Jack glanced up. Planning on using that only as an absolute last resort, she replied grimly. These creatures can't tolerate standard tranquilizers well. It could kill our specimen. Better than letting it kill us, Jack muttered, turning back to his repairs. A series of loud clangs reverberated from inside the containment chamber, followed by an alarm as containment levels dropped below 50%. Almost there, Jack called out, connecting the final bypass circuit. The indicator stabilized momentarily, then plunged again as another boom shook the station. Hull integrity compromised in adjacent section, the automated system announced in its calm mechanical voice. Emergency protocols engaged. Jack swore under his breath. The whole power grid for this section is failing. We need to get out of here, Doc. But Eleanor stood transfixed, staring at the containment chamber door. A deep groaning sound emanated from the thick metal as the hydraulic locks began to fail. It's getting out, she whispered. Jack grabbed her arm. Then we definitely need to leave, now. She shook her head. No, this is what I've been waiting for. A chance to observe it outside controlled conditions. Are you insane? That thing could tear us apart? Or it could prove my theories right. Eleanor's eyes shone with the zealous light of a scientist on the verge of vindication. Trust me, Mr. Mason, this creature is intelligent. If we don't threaten it, the containment door buckled with a horrific screech of tortured metal. Emergency lights bathed the corridor in pulsing red as coolant gas hissed from ruptured lines. Get behind me, Jack ordered, placing himself between Eleanor and the failing door. His hand moved to the small of his back where he kept a combat knife, a habit from his military days, that station security overlooked in the harmless old maintenance man. With a final groan, the containment door gave way. Through the swirling coolant mist stepped a creature straight from humanity's deepest nightmares. The abyssal titan stood nearly 7 feet tall, its body supported by 8 powerful limbs, 4 primary legs, and 4 smaller appendages that seemed to function as arms. Its skin was covered in overlapping scales that gleamed like polished obsidian, and bioluminescent patterns pulsed along its spine and limbs in brilliant blue streaks. Its head featured no visible eyes but a series of sensory pits that gave the impression of a face alien, yet somehow expressive. Jack tightened his grip on the knife but didn't draw it. The creature's movements were cautious, deliberate, not the frenzied attack he'd expected. Remarkable, Eleanor breathed from behind him. It's accessing its surroundings. Look at the bioluminescent patterns they're shifting in response to the environment. And indeed, the blue streaks along the creature's body were changing intensity and configuration as it surveyed the corridor. That's fascinating, Doc, Jack whispered. But maybe save the scientific observations for when we're safely behind 3 inches of reinforced glass. The Titan's head swiveled toward them, sensory pits dilating. Its massive body tensed, and Jack prepared himself for an attack. Instead, the creature emitted a low-frequency sound that vibrated through Jack's chest. Eleanor gasped. It's trying to communicate. Before Jack could respond, another violent tremor shook the station. Overhead pipes burst, sending a cascade of debris crashing down. Jack reacted instinctively, shoving Eleanor aside and diving the other way. When the dust settled, a pile of twisted metal and broken conduits separated him from the scientist, and between Jack and the exit stood the abyssal titan. Doc, you okay? Jack called out, keeping his eyes on the creature. I'm fine. Her voice came from the other side of the debris. The passage to the command center is clear on this side. I'll get help. You do that? Jack muttered, slowly rising to his feet. Now it was just him and the monster. In the flashing emergency lights, the creature's bioluminescence took on an almost hypnotic quality. It made no aggressive moves, simply watching him with those strange sensory organs. Jack's SEAL training kicked in. Assess the situation, find advantages, plan escape routes. But something else stirred in his mind, a lifetime of encountering supposedly dangerous creatures in the wild that were simply reacting to fear and threats. All right, big fella, Jack said softly. Neither of us asked to be in this situation. You want to get home, and so do I. The Titan's head tilted slightly, the way a curious dog might respond to an unfamiliar sound. Its bioluminescent patterns shifted from electric blue to a softer pulsing green. Jack took a careful step to the side, testing its reaction. The creature mirrored his movement, maintaining the distance between them. Not attacking, but not letting him pass either. As Jack shifted position, the emergency lights illuminated something he hadn't noticed before. A ragged wound on the creature's side, partially healed but clearly painful. The flesh around it was discolored, and what looked like surgical staples held it closed. They've been experimenting on you, haven't they? Jack murmured. The creature's patterns flashed briefly, and it made that rumbling sound again. Jack thought of Eleanor's insistence on the Titan's intelligence. If she was right, maybe there was a way to communicate. He slowly raised his empty hands, palms forward, a universal gesture of peace. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said clearly. The Titan remained still, its patterns pulsing steadily now. Then with deliberate slowness, it lowered its massive body slightly, not a threatening posture, but something almost like acknowledgement. Another violent shudder ran through the station, and warning klaxons blared louder. "Emergency decompression in Section 16. All personnel evacuate immediately," the automated system announced. Jack knew the layout of Horizon Station like the back of his hand. Section 16 was directly adjacent to their position, and if it decompressed, the structural integrity of this entire wing would be compromised. "We need to move, now." Jack pointed down the corridor away from the danger zone. Whether the creature understood his words or simply his urgent tone, it turned its head toward the indicated direction, then back to Jack. Making a decision that went against every survival instinct, Jack slowly moved forward, giving the Titan a wide berth as he edged toward the exit. To his surprise, the creature backed away, allowing him passage. As Jack reached the junction that would lead to safety, he glanced back. The Titan remained in place, its patterns now pulsing in a rapid, almost distressed manner. An image flashed in Jack's mind, a hunting trip in Montana decades ago, when he'd freed a wolf caught in a trap. The animal had given him that same look before limping away, wary, pained, but somehow acknowledging the help. "Ah, hell," Jack muttered to himself. "I must be losing my mind." He turned back toward the creature. "You coming or what? This whole section's about to become very unpleasant." As if understanding his words, the Titan moved forward, following Jack at a cautious distance. Together they navigated through the trembling corridors away from the failing section and toward the more stable core of the station. Jack led them to an auxiliary control room, smaller than the main command center, but equipped with systems to monitor the station's status. He sealed the door behind them, then moved to the control panels to assess the situation. "Hurricane's right overhead now," he noted, checking the external sensors. "Station's holding, but we've got multiple hull breaches in the research wing." The Titan moved around the room with surprising grace for its size, examining equipment without touching anything. Its wound looked worse in the bright light of the control room, a long surgical incision that had been roughly closed. Jack rummaged through an emergency cabinet and found a first aid kit. He recalled Eleanor saying something about the creature's biology being carbon-based, similar enough to Earth life, that certain medical principles might apply. "Listen, I don't know if you can understand me," Jack said, opening the kit, "but that wound looks infected, and in my experience, infection is bad news no matter what planet you're from." The Titan watched him with what seemed like curiosity as Jack prepared antiseptic and fresh bandaging materials. Slowly telegraphing his movements, Jack approached. "I'm going to try to help. This might sting a bit." Jack held up the antiseptic spray where the creature could see it. To his amazement, the Titan shifted position, presenting its wounded side more clearly. Either it understood or was making one hell of a coincidental movement. With careful hands that had patched up wounded comrades in combat zones across the world, Jack cleaned the wound. The creature flinched once but remained still. The wound was worse than it had appeared at a distance, evidence of repeated surgeries, tissue samples removed, and what looked disturbingly like electrode attachment points. "They really did a number on you, didn't they?" Jack muttered as he worked. Military types are the same everywhere. If they don't understand something, they either want to weaponize it or destroy it. As Jack applied the final bandage, the Titan's bioluminescent patterns changed again, rippling in soft waves of green and gold. The effect was almost peaceful. Jack stepped back, packing away the unused medical supplies. "There you go. Not hospital quality, but should help with the pain at least." The creature made that rumbling sound again, but it's softer now. It reached out with one of its smaller appendages, not toward Jack, but toward the control panel where the station schematics were displayed. "You want to see that?" Jack asked, surprised. He tapped the display, enlarging the station layout. The Titan studied it, then reached out again, this appendage ending in something like a finger that pointed to a specific section of the schematic, the deepest level of the research wing. "That's where they keep the other specimens," Jack said, understanding dawning. "Are there more like you down there?" The creature's patterns flashed rapidly in what seemed like agitation or urgency. Before Jack could respond, the control room door slid open. Eleanor rushed in, followed by two security officers with weapons drawn. "Stand down," Eleanor shouted when she saw the officers raise their weapons. "Look, it's not attacking. The security officers hesitated, weapons still aimed at the Titan. The creature's bioluminescence shifted back to threatening blue, its posture becoming defensive. Jack stepped between the guns and the Titan. Put those away before you get us all killed. This thing could have torn me apart a dozen times over. It didn't. Move aside, Mason, the lead officer ordered. We have protocols for containment breaches. Your protocols can wait, Eleanor countered, moving forward to stand beside Jack. This is exactly what I've been trying to prove. The Titan is displaying clear signs of intelligence and non-aggressive behavior. The standoff stretched for several tense seconds. Then a new voice came from the doorway. What in God's name is going on here? Director Harris stood there, his usually immaculate suit, rumpled face pale with shock, as he stared at the massive creature behind Jack and Eleanor. Sir, the security officer began, we were about to neutralize the escaped specimen. Like hell you are, Jack interrupted. This specimen just showed me there are others being kept in the lower research wing. Care to explain that, Director? Because last I checked, the UN mandate for this station authorized research, not torture. Harris's expression shifted from shock to calculated coldness. That information is classified, Mason, and irrelevant at the moment. Our priority is containing the specimen. His name is Titan, Eleanor said firmly, and he's demonstrated more intelligence in the past hour than I've seen from your Security Council in 5 years. The Titan moved closer to Jack and Eleanor, its massive body positioned almost protectively behind them. Harris's eyes narrowed. DeWalsh, your reputation for anthropomorphizing specimens is well known, but this is taking it to a dangerous level. That creature is military property under UN Security Resolution 2875. Military property, Jack repeated coldly. Funny how living beings keep getting classified as property when someone wants to cut them open. Harris ignored him, turning to the security officers. Prepare the portable containment unit, and if that fails, you're authorized to use lethal force. No, Eleanor protested. You can't. The station rocked violently as the hurricane intensified above. Lights flickered, and for a moment the room plunged into darkness. When emergency power restored minimal lighting, everything happened at once. The security officers raised their weapons. Eleanor lunged forward to stop them. Harris shouted orders, and Jack made a split-second decision that would change everything. Run, he yelled, slamming his hand down on the emergency evacuation button. Containment doors throughout the sector began closing automatically. The security officers fired, but the Titan moved with astonishing speed, pulling Jack and Eleanor aside as tranquilizer darts embedded in the wall behind them. In the chaos, Jack led the way through a maintenance access hatch, the Titan squeezing its massive form through the opening with surprising agility. Eleanor followed, and Jack sealed the hatch behind them. Mason, Harris's voice echoed from the other side. This is treason. Interfering with classified military assets is punishable by... Save it for someone who hasn't already lost everything, Jack called back. He turned to Eleanor. We need to get to the lower levels. If there are more of these creatures being experimented on, I'm not leaving them to these butchers. Eleanor stared at him, a mix of gratitude and fear in her eyes. You realize what you're doing. Your career, your freedom. Jack gave a bitter laugh. What career? I'm a washed-up SEAL pushing a mop because I wouldn't follow an illegal order 20 years ago. Some mistakes you don't get to fix. He glanced at the Titan, who watched them with those strange sensory organs. But some you do. The creature's patterns pulsed once slowly, almost like a heartbeat. Then it turned toward the narrow maintenance tunnel that would lead them deeper into the station, toward whatever secrets lurked in the restricted research levels, and toward a confrontation decades in the making. As they moved through the darkened passageways, Jack realized he'd crossed a line from which there was no return. But watching the determined set of Eleanor's shoulders ahead of him and feeling the presence of the intelligent being behind him, he knew some lines needed to be crossed. The storm raged above, but the real tempest was just beginning. The maintenance shaft narrowed as it descended into the restricted depths of Horizon Station. Jack Mason led the way, his weathered hands steady on the rungs of the service ladder. The emergency lights cast alternating bands of shadow and dim red illumination across his face, a face that had seen too many wars, too many betrayals, and far too many hard choices. Eleanor Walsh followed closely behind him, her breath coming in short, controlled bursts. For a research scientist in her late 50s, she moved with surprising agility, necessity, and adrenaline, overcoming the protests of aging joints. Most remarkable of all was the abyssal Titan. The massive creature navigated the narrow vertical shaft with impossible grace, its 8 limbs finding purchase on surfaces never designed for anything but human maintenance workers. Its bioluminescent patterns provided additional light pulsing in a steady rhythm that somehow felt reassuring. How much farther? Eleanor whispered, her voice barely audible over the distant wail of emergency sirens and the constant groaning of the station structure as the hurricane raged above. Jack paused, mentally reviewing the schematics he'd memorized years ago when he first took the maintenance job. Not because it was required, but because 20 years as a SEAL had taught him that knowing every exit could mean the difference between life and death. 2 more levels, he replied softly. The shaft will open into Maintenance Junction 12B. From there, we can access the restricted research wing through the environmental control systems. Eleanor's face tightened with determination. They never expected anyone to go down instead of up during an emergency. Security will be focused on the upper levels and evacuation routes. Don't underestimate Hayes, Jack cautioned. That man thinks like a predator. The name hung in the air between them. Colonel Richard Hayes, the man who now led the A-set team hunting them, and the same man who had ended Jack's military career 2 decades earlier. You know him, Eleanor observed, not a question but a statement. Jack's jaw clenched. Iraq, 2003. I was leading a SEAL team on a hostage extraction. Hayes was the commanding officer who gave the order to proceed despite intelligence that civilians would be in the crossfire. His knuckles whitened on the ladder rung. I refused the order. The mission was given to another team. 8 civilians died, including 3 children. The official report called it acceptable collateral damage. Hayes made sure I took the fall for the mission failure. Eleanor's eyes reflected understanding. And now he's here hunting another species he considers expendable. Some men never change, Jack muttered. They just find new targets. Below them, the Titan made a low rumbling sound, its patterns shifting to a deeper blue, almost as if it understood the conversation, or at least the emotions behind it. Jack continued his descent, mind racing through possible scenarios, escape routes, defensive positions. Old habits from a life he thought he had left behind. Yet here he was once again standing against orders that violated everything he believed in. At the bottom of the shaft, a small maintenance platform opened onto a junction of larger corridors. Jack helped Eleanor down the final few rungs, then turned to assist the Titan, but the creature had already maneuvered itself onto the platform with fluid efficiency. Jack pulled out his portable diagnostic tool, a standard-issue device for maintenance workers that he'd modified over the years to access systems well beyond its intended capabilities. Another habit from his previous life, never leave useful tools unimproved. Station security grid shows teams sweeping the upper levels, he reported, studying the small display. They've locked down all standard access points to the research wing. Emergency protocols have sealed most of the station due to the hurricane damage. Can they track us? Eleanor asked, glancing nervously at the overhead sensors. Jack allowed himself a small, grim smile. Maintenance shafts run on separate monitoring systems. As far as the main security is concerned, these areas don't exist except as yellow lines on emergency maps. He tapped several commands into his device. And now I've looped the maintenance cameras. We're ghosts. The Titan moved to the edge of the platform, its sensory pits focused on one particular corridor. Its patterns pulsed in an irregular sequence more urgent than before. I think our friend is trying to tell us something, Jack said, moving closer to the creature. That way leads to the deep research wing. Is that where the others are? The Titan's patterns flashed once in what seemed like affirmation. Eleanor approached cautiously, her scientific curiosity visibly battling with the extraordinary situation. The bioluminescent patterns, they're not just emotional responses, they're communication. She studied the creature with newfound wonder. We've been interpreting them all wrong. These aren't warning displays or mating signals. They're language. Jack checked his diagnostic tool again. Whatever they're saying, we need to move. Hayes won't stay focused on the upper levels for long. They moved swiftly through the dimly lit corridors of the maintenance level, the Titan leading the way now. Jack kept his diagnostic tool active, monitoring security movements and station status. The hurricane continued its assault on the surface, but down here, hundreds of feet below the waves, the only evidence was the occasional tremor, as particularly massive waves hammered the upper structures. Wait, Jack hissed, suddenly throwing out an arm to halt their progress. Security sweep coming through the cross corridor ahead. 2 guards. They pressed themselves against the wall in a recessed maintenance alcove. Jack pulled Eleanor behind him, but realized with a sinking feeling that there was no way to conceal the massive bulk of the Titan. To his astonishment, the creature's bioluminescent patterns dimmed, until they were barely visible and it pressed itself into the shadows of a ceiling recess, somehow compressing its large frame into a space that seemed impossibly small. Boots echoed on metal flooring as two armed security officers passed the junction ahead, flashlight beams sweeping across the corridor. "Maintenance levels clear," one reported into his radio. "Proceeding to Section 8D. "Copy that," came the reply, Hayes' voice instantly recognizable to Jack. "Be advised, Mason knows these tunnels. Check everything twice." "Yes, sir. What about the creature?" "Shoot on sight. Use maximum force. That thing is more dangerous than they're telling you." The guards moved on their footsteps, fading into the distance. Once they were gone, the Titan unfolded itself from its hiding place, its patterns gradually brightening again. "That was remarkable," Eleanor whispered. "Adaptive camouflage combined with skeletal compression. I've never seen anything like it in a creature this size." "Probably how it survives in the deep ocean," Jack suggested, "hunting and hiding from things even nastier than itself." The Titan made that rumbling sound again, but with a different modulation, almost like a correction. Eleanor's eyes widened. Or maybe it's not a predator at all. What if our entire understanding of these creatures is wrong? What if they're not hunters, but something else entirely? Jack checked the corridor ahead. "Philosophy lesson later, Doc. Right now we need to move." They continued through the labyrinthine lower levels, the Titan leading them with increasing urgency. Finally, they reached a heavy security door marked Restricted Area. Authorization level Alpha required. Jack examined the security panel with a professional eye. Military grade, 5-factor authentication, retinal scan, fingerprint voice command, keycard and passcode. He shook his head. "I can't hack this. Not without equipment I don't have." Eleanor's shoulders slumped. "So we're stopped. All this risk for nothing." The Titan moved forward, studying the door with its sensory pits. Then it turned to Jack, its patterns forming complex swirling configurations unlike anything they'd seen before. "What's it doing?" Jack asked. Eleanor watched, fascinated. "I think it's thinking." Without warning, the Titan extended one of its limbs toward the security panel. The tip split open to reveal something like a fine tentacle that inserted itself into the maintenance port beside the main panel, a diagnostic connection point that only the station's top technicians would know about. Jack and Eleanor watched in astonishment. The security panel flickered, cycling through screens faster than human eyes could follow. Within seconds, the door's locks disengaged with a heavy thunk and the massive barrier began to slide open. "It hacked the system," Eleanor whispered in disbelief. Jack stared at the creature with new respect. Not just intelligent, technologically savvy. The door opened to reveal a vast chamber bathed in blue light. The sight that greeted them stole the breath from their lungs. The restricted research wing was enormous, far larger than anything shown on the official station schematics. Dozens of containment chambers lined the walls, each housing creatures similar to the Titan, but smaller, perhaps younger. Scientists in military-style uniforms moved between workstations monitoring readouts and conducting procedures that even at a glance appeared more like weapons testing than biological research. "My God," Eleanor breathed. "This isn't a research facility. It's a weapons laboratory." Jack's eyes hardened as he took in the scene. In the center of the chamber stood a massive tank containing the largest Titan they had seen yet, easily twice the size of their companion. Its patterns flashed in distress as electrodes attached to its body delivered what appeared to be controlled shocks, while researchers measured its responses. "They're torturing it," Eleanor whispered, horror evident in her voice, "trying to provoke an aggressive response." Their Titan's patterns pulsed rapidly, flashing between deep red and electric blue in what could only be interpreted as distress or rage. It moved forward, but Jack caught one of its limbs. "Wait," he cautioned. "There are at least 20 armed personnel in there. We need a plan." The creature turned to him, its sensory pits dilating. For a moment, Jack felt something, a sensation unlike anything he'd experienced before. Not quite a voice, not quite an emotion, but a presence in his mind, an understanding. Eleanor gasped, pressing her hands to her temples. "Did you feel that it's communicating? Not just with patterns, but somehow directly?" "Telepathy," Jack questioned, skeptical, despite the evidence of his own experience. "Some form of neural broadcast," Eleanor suggested, her scientific mind struggling to categorize the phenomenon. "The patterns might be just the visible component of a more complex communication system." Their Titan, Jack found himself thinking of it as their Titan now retracted its limb from Jack's grasp and moved to a secondary control panel near the door. Once again, it interfaced with the system using that strange tentacle appendage. On the main floor of the laboratory, alarms suddenly began to blare. Scientists looked up in confusion as their equipment shut down, emergency containment protocols engaged, and the room's main doors sealed. It's isolating the lab, Jack realized, cutting it off from the rest of the station. Security breach in Section D7, a computerized voice announced over the station's PA system. All personnel implement containment protocol Theta. Jack knew what would happen next. Hayes will send his entire team here now. We need to move fast. Their Titan finished whatever it was doing at the control panel and turned toward the laboratory floor. Its patterns formed a complex sequence that repeated 3 times. Throughout the laboratory, the containment chambers housing the smaller Titans began to open. Panicked scientists ran for exits that no longer functioned while security personnel drew weapons, but seemed uncertain where to aim as more and more creatures were released. "It's freeing them," Eleanor said, a hint of awe in her voice. The massive Titan in the central tank thrashed as its smaller counterparts converged on its containment unit. Working with coordinated precision, they disabled the security systems and shattered the reinforced glass with concentrated blows from multiple limbs. Water flooded the laboratory floor as the enormous creature emerged from its prison. Its bioluminescent patterns blazed with intensity that nearly hurt the eyes, forming complex spirals and pulsing waves that spread outward like ripples in a pond. Every other Titan in the room went still, their own patterns synchronizing with the larger one's display. "They're communicating," Eleanor whispered, all of them simultaneously. Jack's diagnostic tool beeped urgently. "We've got company, multiple security teams converging on this section." He scanned the room looking for escape routes. "We need to find another way out." A new voice cut through the chaos. "There is no other way out, Mason." Colonel Richard Hayes stood on an observation balcony above the laboratory floor, flanked by heavily armed soldiers in tactical gear. Unlike the station's regular security, these men carried military-grade weapons, the kind designed to penetrate even the toughest hide. Hayes hadn't changed much in 20 years. Still ramrod straight, with close-cropped gray hair and cold eyes that assessed threats and calculated kills with machine-like precision. The only difference was the collection of new medals on his tactical vest, rewards for the kind of missions that never made the official records. "So the rumors were true," Hayes called down. The great Jack Mason, war hero turned janitor, still playing the righteous savior. His mouth twisted into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Some things never change." Jack stepped in forward, positioning himself where Hayes could clearly see him. "You're right about that. You're still sacrificing innocence for your wars." Hayes gestured dismissively at the Titans. "Innocence. These creatures destroyed a nuclear submarine, killed 87 sailors." His voice hardened. "Or did your bleeding heart forget about the men and women who served their country?" "That's a lie," Eleanor called out, moving to stand beside Jack. "There was never any attack. The Atlantis struck an underwater volcanic formation during an unauthorized mission in the Mariana Trench. The military blamed the Titans to cover up their mistake and to justify capturing them for weapons research." Hayes' eyes narrowed. "Dr. Walsh, I should have known you'd be involved. Always too attached to your specimens." He turned to his men. "Secure the assets. Lethal force authorized for all human resistance." The soldiers moved with practiced efficiency, deploying along the balcony and taking aim at the Titans below. But before they could fire, the laboratory plunged into darkness. In the sudden blackness, the bioluminescent patterns of the Titans became the only source of light, dozens of glowing blue forms moving in coordinated patterns. The largest Titan emitted a low-frequency sound that vibrated through the metal structure of the station itself. When emergency lighting flickered back on 30 seconds later, the scene had transformed. The Titans had positioned themselves protectively around Jack and Eleanor. The largest one, clearly the leader, stood at the forefront, its patterns pulsing in what seemed like a warning display. Hayes and his men held their positions, weapons trained on the creatures. A tense standoff ensued, neither side willing to make the first move. "You're outmatched, Hayes," Jack called up to the balcony. "Even with your fancy weapons, you can't take down all of them before they reach you. And I think we both know what those limbs would do to human flesh." Eleanor stepped forward, her scientific authority evident in her bearing despite the chaos around them. "Colonel Hayes, these creatures have demonstrated intelligence far beyond what we previously believed. They're communicating, coordinating, problem-solving. They meet every criteria for sentient beings under the United Nations Intelligent Species Protection Act of 2016. "Laws don't apply to national security threats, Doctor," Hayes replied coldly. You of all people should understand that. Or did you think your research was funded out of scientific curiosity? Jack noticed movement from the corner of his eye. A young Asian man in a lab coat was edging along the wall, trying to remain unnoticed in the standoff. Unlike the other scientists who huddled in fear, this man moved with purpose toward a secondary control station. Hayes is just the muscle, Jack realized aloud. Who's really running this operation? Hayes's expression tightened marginally enough to confirm Jack's suspicion. The scientist reached the control panel and began entering commands. On a large display screen above the laboratory, classified files suddenly appeared: research data, test results, and project objectives. My name is Dr. Marcus Chen, the scientist announced, his voice steady despite the guns now swiveling in his direction. I'm the lead geneticist for Project Neptune's Trident, and I can no longer be part of this atrocity. Hayes barked an order. Stand down, Dr. Chen. That's classified information. Chen continued typing, more documents appearing on screen. The world deserves to know what we've been doing here. What I've been doing. He looked up, meeting Jack's eyes across the room. They were never the aggressors. We invaded their territory. When they attempted communication, we interpreted it as an attack. The screens filled with video footage, underwater recordings showing the Titans approaching a submarine, their bioluminescent patterns forming complex sequences. The submarine responded with depth charges, scattering the creatures. Subsequent clips showed military vessels deploying capture devices, hunting the Titans through the darkness of the deep ocean. Those patterns, Eleanor breathed, watching the footage. They were trying to establish contact, not threaten. Hayes signaled to one of his men, who took aim at Chen. That's enough, Doctor. Step away from the console. The genetic modification program was never about defense. Chen continued, ignoring the weapon pointed at him. It was about creating biological weapons, merging human DNA with Titan genetics to create soldiers with their strength, adaptability, and neural capabilities. His voice cracked slightly. What we did to these creatures, it can't be justified by any threat, real or imagined. Last warning, Hayes said coldly. Jack tensed, ready to move, but he was too far away to reach Chen in time. The young scientist knew it too, meeting Jack's eyes with resignation. The files are already transmitting to multiple secure servers, Chen said, including the UN Ethics Committee and 3 major news organizations. He straightened his shoulders. You can't bury this anymore. Hayes's face remained impassive. Fire. The shot never came. In the instant before the soldier could pull the trigger, the station's structure groaned violently. The hurricane, momentarily forgotten in the confrontation, made its presence known with devastating force. A massive wave must have struck the upper levels, because the entire station lurched sideways with a sound like tearing metal. Alarms blared as the overhead announcement system engaged. Critical structural failure detected in sections A through C. Emergency evacuation protocol now in effect. All personnel proceed to escape pods immediately. The laboratory tilted as the station began to list to one side. Equipment crashed to the floor. On the balcony, Hayes and his men struggled to maintain their footing. Their Titan moved with a startling speed, positioning itself beneath Chen just as the section of wall he clung to gave way. The scientist fell, but instead of crashing to the floor 20 feet below, he landed on the Titan's broad back. We need to get to the evacuation pods, Jack shouted over the alarms, helping Chen down from the creature's back. The primary evacuation bay is 3 levels up, Chen told them, wincing as he tested an ankle that had twisted in the fall. But there's a secondary system for the research team. Through there, he pointed to a reinforced door at the far end of the laboratory. Eleanor helped support Chen while Jack led the way, their Titan and several smaller ones following. The remaining creatures, led by the massive one from the central tank, moved toward other exits, instinctively seeking escape routes from the failing structure. Hayes and his men had disappeared from the balcony, presumably heading for their own evacuation route. The reinforced door Chen had indicated led to a short corridor and another security door. This one Chen opened with his access codes. Beyond lay a small hangar containing 6 submersible escape pods, teardrop-shaped vehicles, designed to surface even in heavy seas. These are prototype deep-water evacuation units, Chen explained as they hurried inside, designed specifically for the research team to escape with specimens if necessary. Specimens, Eleanor repeated with disgust. You mean prisoners? Chen's face fell. Yes, There's no excuse for what we did, what I helped do. Jack examined the nearest pod. How many people can each one hold? 6 humans, or... Chen glanced at their Titan, maybe 2 of them. They're larger than we anticipated when designing the pods. Another violent shudder ran through the station. The overhead lights flickered ominously. Warning: catastrophic failure imminent. All personnel evacuate immediately. Time to structural collapse 8 minutes. Jack made a quick calculation. There are at least 20 Titans still in the facility. Even with all 6 pods, we can't evacuate them all. Their Titan moved to one of the pods, examining it with its sensory pits. Then it turned to the others of its kind that had followed them, its patterns forming complex sequences. To everyone's amazement, the smaller Titans began to exit the hangar, heading back toward the main laboratory. "Where are they going?" Eleanor asked. Their Titans' patterns shifted in what had become a recognizable communication attempt. Chen watched, understanding dawning on his face. "I think they're going to find their own way out, through the ocean itself." "That's impossible," Jack objected. "Even if they can withstand the pressure change, the currents from the hurricane would tear them apart." "Maybe not," Eleanor said thoughtfully. "We've always underestimated them. These creatures evolved in the most hostile environment on Earth, the deepest ocean trenches. Pressure changes, occurrence, temperature variations. They might be far more adaptable than we realized." Their Titan confirmed this with a pattern they'd come to recognize as affirmation. "We need to move," Jack insisted as another tremor shook the hangar. "Chen, get the pod ready." While Chen prepared the evacuation pod, Jack used his diagnostic tool to access the station's security systems one last time. The display showed widespread failures throughout the structure. In several sections, the hull had been breached completely with seawater flooding in. Most of the station's personnel had already evacuated. The security feeds showed Hayes and his team boarding military-grade escape vessels from the upper levels. "Hayes got away," Jack reported grimly. "For now," Chen said, looking up from the pod's controls. "But with the evidence I transmitted, he won't get far. The military will disavow all knowledge of the project, throw him to the wolves to save themselves from the scandal." Jack wasn't so sure. Men like Hayes had a way of turning disasters to their advantage. But that was a problem for another day. "Pod's ready," Chen announced. "It's programmed to surface 5 miles from the eye of the hurricane where rescue vessels should be waiting." Jack, Eleanor, and Chen boarded the pod, their Titan following with some difficulty, its large form barely fitting through the hatch. Once sealed inside, the cramped space became even more confined, with the massive creature taking up most of the available room. Chen initiated the launch sequence. With a mechanical clunk, the pod disconnected from the station and began its automated ascent. Through the small viewing ports, they could see other shapes moving through the water, the Titans swimming with powerful strokes of their multiple limbs, their bioluminescent patterns providing ghostly illumination in the darkened water. "They're following a similar trajectory to our own," Chen observed, using the pod as a guide through the turbulent waters. The journey to the surface was harrowing. Even in the sturdy escape pod, they could feel the powerful currents generated by the hurricane. The small vessel was tossed and spun, its stabilizers working overtime to maintain the programmed course. After what seemed like hours but was probably only 20 minutes, the pod breached the surface with a jarring impact. Outside, the hurricane still raged, massive waves tossing the pod like a toy. Rain lashed against the viewing ports with such force it sounded like gravel striking metal. "Rescue beacon activated," Chen reported, checking the systems. "But in these conditions, it might be hours before anyone can reach us." Jack nodded, conserving his energy. 20 years in the SEALs had taught him the value of patience in survival situations. They had air, they had water, and the pod's power systems were functioning. They could wait. Eleanor sat beside him, in exhaustion evident in her posture, but a light of scientific excitement still burning in her eyes. "Do you think the others made it, the rest of the Titans?" Before anyone could answer, their Titan pressed itself against one of the viewing ports, its patterns forming a slow, rhythmic pulse. Outside in the churning waters, answering pulses of bioluminescence could be seen, dozens of them surrounding the pod. "They made it," Chen whispered, awe evident in his voice. "And they're protecting us, keeping station around the pod." "Not protecting," Eleanor corrected softly. "Accompanying, staying with their friend." She looked at their Titan with newfound respect. "They could have abandoned us, disappeared into the deep ocean. Instead, they're waiting with us." Jack watched the light display outside with a mixture of wonder and tactical assessment. The Titans had positioned themselves in a formation that helped stabilize the pod against the worst of the waves, their powerful bodies absorbing impacts that would have otherwise tossed the small vessel dangerously. "They're not just intelligent," Jack realized aloud. "They're ethical, loyal." He met the Titan's sensory pits with a steady gaze. "They don't abandon their allies. The creature's patterns shifted to that now familiar green-gold configuration that seemed to indicate agreement or contentment. Hours passed as they rode out the storm. The hurricane gradually moved inland, its fury diminishing over the Florida coastline. By dawn, the seas had calmed enough that rescue seemed possible. Chen monitored the communication systems. "I'm picking up a transmission. Rescue vessels are approaching." His expression darkened. "But they're military, not Coast Guard." Jack wasn't surprised. Hayes won't give up that easily. He'll want to eliminate witnesses, recapture the Titans. Their Titan moved away from the viewing port, its patterns shifting to the urgent configuration they'd seen before. It pressed a limb against the inner hull, then against the hatch mechanism. "It wants to leave," Eleanor interpreted, "before the military vessels arrive." "If we open the hatch here, we'll flood the pod," Chen objected. Jack studied the creature thoughtfully. "I don't think that's what it's suggesting." He moved to the pod's control panel. "These pods have emergency surface deployment right for reaching shore if rescue is delayed." Chen nodded. "Yes, there's an inflatable raft system, but in these waters—" "Deploy it," Jack ordered. "Now." Chen hesitated only briefly before activating the system. With a pneumatic hiss, an external compartment opened, and a self-inflating raft expanded on the surface beside the pod. Their Titan immediately moved to the hatch, its patterns forming an urgent questioning sequence. "It wants us to go with it," Eleanor realized. Jack checked the radar display on the pod's control panel. Military vessels closing in. ETA 12 minutes. He made his decision. "We need to disappear now." Chen looked uncertain. "The raft in these conditions is better than facing Hayes in his cleanup operation." Jack finished for him. "Trust me." The young scientist nodded, his decision made. "I've gone too far to turn back now." They gathered what supplies they could from the pod's emergency kit, water, first aid supplies, and emergency beacon they could activate when safe. Then, with careful timing between wave sets, they opened the hatch and transferred to the raft. The moment they were aboard, the Titans surrounded them, their massive bodies forming a protective barrier against the still considerable waves. Their leader, the one who had first escaped with Jack, positioned itself partly beneath the raft, stabilizing it with its broad back. "They're carrying us," Eleanor breathed in amazement. Guided and protected by the Titans, the raft moved swiftly through the water, away from the approaching military vessels. Jack used a small pair of binoculars from the emergency kit to watch their pursuers. The ship slowed near the empty pod personnel deploying to investigate. "They'll figure out what happened quickly," Jack warned. "We need to find somewhere to hide." Their Titan seemed to understand. Its patterns formed a complex sequence that was mirrored by the others. As one, the group changed direction, heading toward the distant shoreline. Chen checked their position using a small GPS unit from the emergency supplies. "They're taking us south toward the Everglades." His expression showed new respect. "Smart. The military will have trouble following us through those waterways." Hours passed as they traveled, the Titans maintaining their protective formation around the raft. Occasionally, one would surface nearby, its patterns communicating something to their leader, who would adjust their course accordingly. By mid-afternoon, they had reached the outer edges of the vast wetland ecosystem that formed Florida's southern tip. Here, the ocean gave way to a complex network of mangrove-lined waterways, shallow bays, and isolated islands. The Titans guided the raft into a narrow channel, moving deeper into the protected wilderness. The larger ones could no longer navigate the shallow waters and gradually dropped behind, but 6 of the smaller ones continued with them, including their original companion. Eventually, they reached a small, isolated island, little more than a raised hummock of land with a dense covering of vegetation. Hidden among the mangroves was a crude dock and, surprisingly, a small, weather-beaten cabin. "What is this place?" Eleanor asked as they carefully disembarked from the raft. Jack studied the cabin with professional assessment. "Hunting camp, maybe, or a smuggler's hideout. Been abandoned for a while from the look of it." Their Titan emerged partially from the water, its upper body resting on the muddy bank, while its lower limbs remained submerged. Its patterns formed a slower, more deliberate sequence than before. Eleanor watched intently. "I think it's trying to tell us something important, something complex." Chen had been quiet for much of the journey, the weight of his role in the Titan project evidently weighing on him. Now he stepped forward, studying the creature's patterns with scientific precision. "The patterns have mathematical properties," he observed. "Fibonacci sequences, prime number intervals. There's structure here, not just random signaling." Jack secured the raft and began assessing their immediate needs: shelter, water, security. But his mind was already moving beyond survival to the larger problem. Hayes would not stop hunting them. And now they had evidence that could destroy not just his career, but an entire classified military program. We need to get the evidence you transmitted to people who can use it, Jack told Chen as they explored the abandoned cabin. Despite years of neglect, the structure was sound as metal roof and treated lumber resistant to the harsh Florida elements. I sent it to people I trust, Chen replied. But without us to testify to explain what we saw, it might not be enough. Eleanor joined them, her face showing the strain of their ordeal, but her eyes still bright with scientific excitement. We have more than testimony. We have proof that these creatures are intelligent, communicative beings. She gestured toward the waterline where their Titan waited patiently. If we can establish a reliable communication system, document their language properly. First, we need to survive the next 48 hours, Jack reminded them. Hayes will have search teams combing every inch of coastline. Satellites, drones, coastal patrols. Chen looked troubled. The Titans are too conspicuous. Their bioluminescence would be visible for miles at night. As if understanding their dilemma, their Titan submerged itself, completely vanishing beneath the murky water. The other creatures followed suit, their lights disappearing one by one. They're hiding, Eleanor said softly, protecting us again. Jack began securing the cabin, checking sight lines and potential defensive positions, habits ingrained from decades of combat experience. We need a way to contact the outside world on our terms, someone with enough authority to protect both us and the Titans. Chen thought for a moment. I have a contact at the UN Environmental Council. She helped draft the Intelligent Species Protection Act. If we can reach her securely. And how do we do that without giving away our position? Jack questioned. Eleanor had been examining the cabin more thoroughly. In a back corner covered by an old tarp, she discovered an unexpected treasure, an ancient ham radio setup. What about this old technology harder to trace than cell phones or internet? Jack examined the equipment with appreciation. Cold War era, analog. If it still works, we might be able to reach someone without immediate detection. He began checking connections, testing power sources. Needs batteries and some repairs, but I can get it running. As night fell, they worked by the light of a single candle found in the cabin's sparse supplies. Jack repaired the radio using parts salvaged from their emergency beacon, while Chen and Eleanor attempted to document the Titan's communication patterns using Chen's knowledge of the research and Eleanor's biological expertise. Outside, the Florida wilderness came alive with night sounds, the calls of birds and frogs, the rustling of creatures moving through underbrush. Occasionally, they caught glimpses of bioluminescence beneath the water's surface, the Titans maintaining their vigilant presence. By midnight, Jack had the radio operational. Using Chen's instructions, he carefully tuned to a frequency used by his UN contact for secure communications. This is Dr. Marcus Chen, verification code Sierra Echo 93. He spoke into the microphone. Message for Dr. Amara Singh, UN Environmental Council. Emergency Protocol Delta. They waited, the radio hissing with static. Minutes stretched into an hour with no response. Maybe no one's monitoring, Eleanor suggested, her hope fading. Or they think it's a trap, Jack added grimly. Just as they were about to give up for the night, the radio crackled to life. Verification accepted, Dr. Chen, came a woman's voice distorted by distance and atmospheric interference. This is Singham. Your data packet has caused quite a stir. Where are you? Chen exchanged looks with Jack, who nodded cautiously. Secure location in the Everglades, Chen replied. With witnesses and evidence regarding the Titan project, we need extraction and protection. Military elements are hunting us. Understood. I've already convened an emergency session of the Ethics Council based on your data. A pause. The creatures. Are they with you? Eleanor took the microphone. This is Dr. Eleanor Walsh, Marine Biology. Yes, several specimens are with us. They're intelligent, communicative, and have repeatedly demonstrated protective behaviors toward humans who treated them ethically. They meet all criteria for Level 1 protection under the Act. Dr. Walsh, your research on neural structures in deep-sea organisms was groundbreaking. I had no idea you were involved with this project. Singh's voice carried new respect. Can you document their communicative abilities? The Council will need evidence. We're working on it, Eleanor replied, but we need time and safety. Understood. I'm arranging a UN peacekeeping team for extraction. Maintain radio silence after this transmission. We'll contact you on this frequency in exactly 12 hours with coordinates and authentication codes. Singh's voice grew serious. Be careful. We've detected unusual military movements along the Florida coast. officially described as hurricane response, but the pattern suggests search operations. Jack took the microphone. This is Jack Mason, former SEAL. Be advised that Colonel Richard Hayes is leading the search. He has Tier 1 assets and black budget resources. Your extraction team needs to be prepared for military-grade resistance. Mason Singh sounded surprised. Your name is in the classified files Chen sent. According to these records, you were dishonorably discharged for refusing orders that would have resulted in civilian casualties. That's one way of putting it, Jack replied dryly. The UN values those who place ethical considerations above orders, Mr. Mason. Singh's tone carried respect. Hold your position. Help is coming. Sing out. The radio went silent. Jack switched it off to conserve power. 12 hours, he summarized. We need to be ready to move, and we need to document everything we can about the Titans in that time. Chen nodded. I have research notes on my tablet. Limited battery, but enough to create a basic translation matrix for the bioluminescent patterns. Eleanor was already gathering materials. If we combine your data with new observations focusing on repeatable pattern sequences, Jack left them to their scientific work and stepped outside, scanning the perimeter of their small sanctuary. The night was clear, stars visible between the canopy of trees. In the water, occasional flashes of light betrayed the presence of their Titan guardians. As he stood watch, a larger pattern of light approached from deeper water. Their original Titan surfaced near the dock, its upper body emerging while its lower limbs remained submerged. It regarded Jack with those strange sensory organs, its patterns forming what he'd come to recognize as a questioning sequence. Help is coming, Jack told it, unsure how much it could understand of human speech. People who will protect you and your kind. No more laboratories, no more tests. The creature's patterns shifted to a configuration Jack hadn't seen before. Slower, more deliberate, with concentric circles expanding outward from its central spine. A strange sensation brushed against Jack's consciousness. Not words exactly, but concepts, impressions. Images of deep ocean trenches, of communities of Titans, she living in complex social structures, of encounters with human vessels over many years, some peaceful, others ending in violence. Jack staggered, slightly overwhelmed by the alien perspective, suddenly sharing space in his mind. You're showing me your home, he realized aloud. Your people. The impression deepened a sense of loss, of capture, of others still missing. Of a desire to return to the deep waters where they belonged, but also of gratitude toward the humans who had helped them. We'll help you get home, Jack promised. All of you. The mental connection faded, the Titans' patterns returning to their normal configuration. But something had changed between them. A deeper understanding that transcended the barriers of biology and evolution. As dawn approached, Jack returned to the cabin where Chen and Eleanor had made remarkable progress documenting the Titan communication system. It's extraordinary, Eleanor told him, eyes bright with discovery despite her exhaustion. Their language combines bioluminescent patterns, low-frequency sounds beyond human hearing range, and some form of direct neural transmission. Chen experienced it too, a kind of controlled telepathy. Jack nodded. I just had a similar experience outside. It showed me its home, its people. Chen looked up from his tablet. The neural capability is what the military was most interested in. Imagine soldiers who could communicate instantly without radio or verbal exchange, but they could never get it to work with human subjects. His face darkened. The failed experiments, they were horrific. Eleanor placed a hand on Chen's shoulder. You're making amends now. This documentation will help ensure nothing like that ever happens again. The morning passed as they continued their work, taking turns standing watch. The Titans remained mostly hidden, conserving energy and avoiding detection, but occasionally their leader would surface to communicate with Eleanor and Chen, adding to their growing database of pattern-meaning correlations. As the appointed hour approached, Jack prepared for extraction, securing their documentation, planning evacuation routes, establishing contingencies. 20 years of civilian life hadn't dulled his operational planning skills. Remember, when Singh's team arrives, we move quickly. No hesitation. The Titans follow in the water. Any sign of trouble, we abort and regroup at the secondary location we discussed. Jack checked the old revolver he'd found in the cabin, 6 rounds, slightly corroded, but functional. Better than nothing if Hayes found them first. Chen and Eleanor nodded, their faces showing the strain of their ordeal, but also determination. At exactly noon, the radio crackled to life. Chen, this is Singh. Authentication code Bravo Echo Charlie 9. Extraction team approaching your position from the northwest. ETA 10 minutes. blue berets with white band marking. Chen acknowledged the transmission, and they moved outside to prepare. But as they scanned the waterway to the northwest, Jack noticed their Titans suddenly submerge its patterns flashing in what they'd learned to recognize as an alarm signal. The other creatures vanished instantly. Jack's instincts screamed danger. Something's wrong. Get back inside. Now, they barely made it to the cabin when the distinctive sound of helicopter rotors became audible, approaching rapidly from the south, the opposite direction from the UN team. Haze, Jack said grimly, peering through a gap in the cabin's weather-beaten boards. Black Ops helicopter, no markings. The helicopter appeared above the tree line hovering over the small island. From its open door, armed men in tactical gear prepared to fast rope down. Extraction team aboard approach. Singh's voice came urgently over the radio. Hostile forces at target location. Stand by for new coordinates. But it was too late. Haze had found them. The first of the tactical team touched ground 50 yards from the cabin. Others followed swiftly, establishing a perimeter with practiced efficiency. Chen Walsh Mason, Haze's voice boomed through a loudspeaker. You are surrounded. Exit the structure with hands visible. This is your only warning. Jack checked the revolver again, 6 rounds against what looked like a dozen heavily armed operators. Not odds he liked. The documentation, he told Chen urgently. Is it backed up, secured? Chen nodded. Triple redundancy. Copies transmitted to secure servers when we contacted Singh. Even if they take the physical evidence, the data is safe. Good. Jack handed Eleanor the radio. If anything happens to us, contact Singh. Tell her everything. Eleanor's face was pale but determined. What are you going to do? Jack managed a grim smile. What I do best. Buy us some time. He moved to the cabin and door weapon, concealed behind his back. Outside, Hayes' men had established a firing line, weapons trained on the small structure. Hayes, Jack called out. Let's talk about this. Just you and me. Through his binoculars, Jack could see Hayes in the helicopter speaking into a radio. After a moment, the colonel descended to the ground using a fast rope, his movements as precise and controlled as they had been 20 years ago. Hayes approached to within 30 yards of the cabin, stopping at a position that gave him clear sight lines while keeping him partially shielded by a large cypress tree. There's nothing to talk about, Mason, Hayes called. You've interfered with classified military assets and violated at least 6 national security provisions, the penalties for which include life imprisonment or worse. Funny thing about those provisions, Jack replied, stepping partially into view while keeping the revolver hidden. They don't apply to crimes against humanity or violations of the UN Charter on Intelligent Species. Hayes laughed, the sound cold and empty. You think those creatures are people, they're weapons, Mason, tools, just like you and I were tools for the government when it suited them. The difference is I figured that out, Jack said. You're still following orders without questioning what they cost. A flicker of genuine emotion crossed Hayes' face. You always thought you were better than the rest of us, more righteous. Tell me, Mason, how does that moral superiority feel now? Was it worth throwing away your career, your life? Jack's grip tightened on the revolver. He could end this now, one shot at this range, and Hayes would never harm another living being. But that would trigger an immediate response from the tactical team. Chen and Eleanor wouldn't survive the assault. We both know how this ends, Hayes continued, gesturing to his men. Either you come out now or we come in and get you. And those specimens you're so concerned about, they become shark food. As if on cue, the water around the island began to churn. Hayes' men shifted nervously, weapons swiveling toward the disturbance. For a moment, Jack thought the Titans were attacking, a move that would justify everything Hayes had claimed about their aggressive nature. But instead of lunging from the water, bioluminescent patterns appeared beneath the surface, dozens of them surrounding the island in concentric circles. The patterns pulsed in perfect synchronization, forming complex, mesmerizing sequences, unlike anything they documented. The effect was visible, even in daylight, a display of such coordinated beauty that even Hayes' hardened soldiers lowered their weapons, slightly transfixed. Jack felt that strange mental connection again, stronger now with so many creatures linked together. But this time it wasn't just impressions or images. This time there were words, concepts translated directly into his consciousness. We are not weapons, we are not tools, we are the deep ones, and we choose peace. The message resonated not just in Jack's mind, but in the minds of everyone present. Hayes' men, Chen and Eleanor, in the cabin. Jack could see it in their faces, the shock of alien thoughts touching human consciousness. Hayes staggered, pressing a hand to his temple. What is this? The mental voice continued, accompanied by the hypnotic light display. You have hunted us, captured us, tried to use us for war, yet we offer understanding. We can share knowledge of the deep places, of worlds beyond your reach, but only as equals, never as slaves. The UN extraction team had arrived during the display, their boats approaching cautiously from the northwest. Unlike Hayes's men, they held their weapons pointed downward, blue berets, visible as symbols of peacekeeping rather than aggression. Hayes seemed to struggle against the mental contact, his military training fighting the intrusion. But the Titans' combined effort was too powerful to resist completely. You can't control human minds, he said through gritted teeth. Not control, share, understand, choose. In the water, the largest Titan, the one from the central tank at the facility, surfaced fully, its massive form dwarfing the others. Its patterns formed a final complex sequence that seemed to pulse directly into the consciousness of every human present. See us as we are, then decide. Images flooded into their shared awareness. The Titan civilization in the deepest ocean trenches, their art formed from bioluminescent displays, their science and philosophy developed over thousands of years of peaceful existence. Their first cautious observations of human vessels. Their attempts at contact misinterpreted as aggression. The pain of capture, of experimentation, of being treated as mindless animals. When the mental connection faded, Hayes's men stood motionless, weapons lowered. The UN peacekeepers had moved closer, establishing a position but not initiating conflict. Hayes himself seemed shaken, his customary cold control cracked by what he had experienced. For the first time in 20 years, Jack saw genuine uncertainty in the man's eyes. They could have killed us all, Hayes said quietly. At any point, they didn't. No, Jack agreed. They chose another way. Maybe it's time we did too. The standoff had fundamentally changed. The arrival of UN observers, the indisputable demonstration of the Titan's intelligence and communicative abilities, and the evidence Chen had already transmitted. All of it created a situation that even Hayes couldn't simply shoot his way out of. Colonel Hayes called the leader of the UN team, a tall woman in the distinctive blue beret. This area is now under United Nations protection by resolution of the Security Council. Your team is ordered to stand down and withdraw. Hayes stared at the water, where dozens of Titans now floated, partially surfaced, their patterns forming a peaceful, coordinated display. Something shifted in his expression, not surrender exactly, but recognition. The cold tactician acknowledged the battlefield had changed beyond his ability to control. This isn't over, Mason, Hayes said quietly. Then to his team, stand down, we're pulling out. The tactical team retreated to the helicopter, maintaining discipline, but clearly affected by what they had experienced. Hayes was the last to board, his eyes meeting Jack's one final time, a look that contained both threat and something almost like respect. As the helicopter lifted away, Eleanor and Chen emerged from the cabin, joining Jack by the water's edge. The UN peacekeepers approached, led by a woman Jack recognized from news reports as Dr. Amara Singh herself, the architect of the Intelligent Species Protection Act. Dr. Chen, Dr. Walsh, Mr. Mason, Singh greeted them formally. On behalf of the United Nations, I thank you for your courage in bringing this matter to light. She turned her attention to the Titans in the water, and I extend the same gratitude to our new friends from the deep. Their original Titan moved forward, water cascading from its powerful form as it emerged near the dock. Its patterns formed a now familiar sequence. Acknowledgement grew, ending the beginning of diplomatic exchange. Singh smiled. I believe we have much to discuss. Jack watched as scientists from the UN team began setting up communication equipment, as Eleanor and Chen shared their documentation, as the first formal contact between humanity and the Titans took shape before his eyes. His part in this story wasn't over. Hayes was still out there, and the evidence of military experimentation would need to be presented to authorities. There would be hearings, testimony, probably threats against all of them. But looking at the peaceful exchange unfolding on this small island in the Everglades, Jack felt something he hadn't experienced in 20 years. Hope. The Titan that had started this journey with him, from scared captive to ambassador of its kind, approached where he stood, slightly apart from the others. Its patterns formed a sequence he now recognized as a question. What next? Now, Jack told it quietly, we build something better. Together. The creature's patterns shifted to that familiar green-gold configuration that meant agreement, contentment, trust. In that moment, standing between worlds, between land and water, between species, between his past and an unexpected future, Jack Mason found peace. The storm had passed, but the real journey was just beginning. Sunrise painted the Everglades in hues of amber and gold, the first light of day filtering through cypress and mangrove canopies. On a small island hidden deep within this ancient wilderness, an extraordinary gathering had formed. United Nations peacekeepers, in their distinctive blue berets, established a secure perimeter. Scientists and diplomatic personnel worked from hastily assembled field stations, their equipment humming with activity. At the water's edge, where land met the brackish channels of the wetlands, beings from two worlds communicated across the vast divide of evolution. Jack Mason sat on an overturned crate watching the remarkable scene unfold. His weathered face, lined by 60 years of life and 20 years of warfare, remained impassive, but his eyes held a quiet wonder. After decades of military service and years of anonymous maintenance work, he found himself at the center of history being made. First contact with an intelligent alien species, not from distant stars, but from the unexplored depths of Earth's own oceans. Dr. Eleanor Walsh moved among the gathered titans with the barely contained excitement of a scientist whose life's work had been vindicated beyond her wildest hopes. Her hands flew over a tablet computer as she documented the increasingly complex exchanges between humans and the deep-sea beings. Dr. Marcus Chen worked alongside her. His guilt over past involvement in the military's exploitation of the Titans transformed into passionate dedication to understanding their unique biology and culture. The young geneticist had aged years and days, the weight of his complicity tempered by the chance for redemption. The Titans themselves, 27 in all, ranging from juveniles to the massive elder that had led them to freedom, floated in the shallows surrounding the island. Their bioluminescent patterns rippled in synchronized configurations, communicating not just with humans, but with each other in a language of light and neural energy that humans were only beginning to comprehend. Dr. Imara Singh, the UN Special Envoy for Intelligent Species Protection, approached where Jack sat. Unlike many of the diplomats and officials who had arrived in the hours after their rescue, Singh had dispensed with formality. Her blue beret was tucked into her belt, and she carried 2 steaming mugs of coffee. "You look like you could use this," she said, offering one to Jack. He accepted with a nod of thanks. Military habit, never turn down hot coffee when it's available. Singh leaned against a nearby tree, her gaze taking in the scene before them. "In 30 years with the United Nations, I've mediated peace accords, drafted international treaties, and negotiated hostage releases. But this?" She shook her head in wonder. "This is unprecedented." Jack sipped the coffee, appreciating its warmth and caffeine after a night with little sleep. "What happens now? To them?" He nodded toward the Titans. "The Security Council has granted them provisional status under the Intelligent Species Protection Act," Singh replied. "Full rights to their oceanic territories, recognition as a sovereign intelligence, protection from capture or exploitation." "Hayes and his people won't give up that easily," Jack cautioned. "Men like that don't just walk away from what they consider a strategic asset." Singh's expression hardened slightly. "Colonel Hayes and the military division he represents have been officially disavowed by the Defense Department. According to public statements, he was operating outside authorized parameters." Jack snorted. "Convenient. When Black Ops go public, suddenly nobody authorized anything." "Politics," Singh acknowledged with distaste. "But the evidence Dr. Chen provided is irrefutable. Combined with the direct neural communication the Titans established with witnesses, including UN personnel, no government can deny their sentience now." The largest Titan, the one Jack had mentally dubbed the Elder, surfaced near them. Its massive form dwarfed even the other impressive specimens of its kind. Patterns of light cascaded along its spine in what they had learned to recognize as a formal greeting. Jack nodded in response, having developed his own simplified form of communication with the creatures. "Morning, big guy." The creature's sensory pits focused on him with what Jack had come to interpret as something like recognition. A tendril of thought brushed against his consciousness, not intrusive, but a gentle acknowledgement of connection. Singh watched the exchange with fascination. "They seem to have formed a particular bond with you. Dr. Walsh believes it may be because you were the first to treat them with respect rather than fear." Jack shrugged. "Nothing complicated about it. You don't need a PhD to know the difference between a monster and a thinking being that's been hurt." The Elder Titan's patterns shifted to a configuration Jack recognized, a request for communication. He set down his coffee mug and moved to the water's edge, kneeling to be closer to the creature's sensory organs. The Titan extended a limb partially from the water, an invitation to the neural connection they had established in the days since their escape. Jack placed his hand near the limb, not quite touching. The familiar sensation washed over him, alien thoughts translated imperfectly into human concepts. The others come from the deep places to witness the agreement. Jack had learned to respond mentally, focusing his thoughts with a clarity that seemed to bridge the species gap. More of your kind, how many? The impression he received wasn't a number, but a sense of multitude, dozens, perhaps hundreds of titans gathering in the deeper waters beyond the Everglades, waiting and watching this first diplomatic exchange between their kind and humanity. They are cautious. Many remember the hunting, the capture. Jack understood. We'll make this right, a new beginning. The connection faded as the Titan withdrew, returning to the gathered group where Eleanor and Chen continued their documentation. What did it tell you? Singh asked, having observed the exchange with keen interest. More Titans are gathering offshore, Jack reported, waiting to see how these negotiations play out. He fixed Singh with a direct gaze. We can't afford to screw this up. Singh nodded gravely. I understand the stakes, Mr. Mason. This is about more than scientific discovery or even diplomatic relations. This is about recognizing that humanity is not alone in possessing intelligence, culture, and rights. She squared her shoulders with renewed determination. The formal recognition ceremony will proceed as planned. Representatives from 12 nations will be present, including the U.S. Secretary of State. Jack's tactical mind immediately shifted to security concerns. That's a lot of high-value targets in one remote location. If Hayes wanted to eliminate witnesses and recapture the Titans, we've thought of that, Singh assured him. UN peacekeeping forces have established a no-fly zone over this region. Naval vessels are patrolling the coastal waters, and the ceremony itself will be broadcast globally with multiple redundant feeds. Any attempt at interference would be witnessed by millions. Jack wasn't entirely convinced, but he recognized the strategic thinking. Public exposure was often the best defense against covert operations. Throughout the day, more officials arrived, diplomats, scientists, military attachés from nations whose governments had been briefed on the situation. Each was given a carefully controlled introduction to the Titans, with Eleanor and Chen serving as scientific intermediaries, and the Titans themselves choosing which humans they would allow closer access. Jack found himself acting as an unexpected bridge between the two species. The Titans seemed to trust his assessment of newcomers, responding to subtle cues in his body language when evaluating whether to approach particular humans. For creatures from such a different evolutionary path, they showed remarkable insight into human intentions. By mid-afternoon, preparations for the formal recognition ceremony were complete. A simple but dignified platform had been constructed at the water's edge, allowing both land and aquatic participants to be part of the proceedings. News crews had been permitted limited access, their cameras ready to broadcast the historic event to a world that had no idea intelligent alien life had been living in Earth's oceans for millennia. Jack stood to decide, uncomfortable in the clean clothes Singh's team had provided, but appreciating the tactical advantage of blending in with the gathered officials. His eyes constantly scanned the perimeter, the sky, the water approaches. Old habits died hard, and something about this setup made his instincts prickle with concern. Eleanor approached, her face alight with the rush of scientific discovery. Can you believe this is happening? Everything I've theorized about deep-sea intelligence vindicated in a single day. She looked at Jack more closely, noting his vigilance. You're worried. Hayes is still out there, Jack replied simply. The whole world is watching now, she reminded him. What could he possibly do? Jack had spent too many years in Black Ops to be reassured by publicity. Men like Hayes don't think like normal people, Doc. Exposure just raises the stakes, makes failure costlier. Before Eleanor could respond, a commotion near the main landing area drew their attention. Additional boats were arriving, these bearing the insignia of the United States Marine Corps. Jack tensed his hand, instinctively moving toward a weapon he no longer carried. Singh hurried over, her expression concerned but controlled. Last-minute security detail insisted upon by the State Department. They're cleared through proper channels. Jack watched as the Marines established positions around the perimeter, their discipline evident, but their presence changing the atmosphere of the gathering. The Titans seemed to sense the shift as well, their patterns displaying configurations Jack had learned to recognize as wariness or concern. I don't like it, he told Singh quietly. These aren't regular Marines. Look at how they move, how they position themselves. These are special operators. Singh studied the newcomers with newfound concern. Can you be certain? I spent 20 years working with men like that, Jack confirmed. The way they scan sectors, maintain spacing, check fields of fire, these aren't ceremonial guards, they're combat ready. The ceremony begins in 30 minutes, Singh said, visibly troubled. The Secretary of State is already en route. We can't postpone without causing a diplomatic incident. Jack made a quick decision. Double-check their authorization. Through your channels, not U.S. military, I'm going to warn our friends. He nodded toward the Titans. While Singh contacted UN headquarters for verification, Jack approached the water's edge where their original Titan, the one he had first helped escape, waited. Of all the creatures, this one had formed the strongest bond with him, almost like the connection between old comrades who had faced death together. Jack knelt by the water, keeping his voice low. Something's not right. Be ready to get your people to deep water if things go bad. The Titan's patterns shifted in acknowledgement. A gentle mental touch conveyed understanding and gratitude, but also determination. The impression Jack received wasn't of flight, but of protective stance. The Titans weren't planning to flee if threatened. They intended to defend their human allies. Don't risk yourselves for us, Jack urged. Your survival is what matters. The mental response was clear and resolute. Together, as before. Jack couldn't help but smile grimly. Loyalty transcended species, it seemed. Singh returned, her expression grave. UN Command has no record of authorizing Marine security for this event. The Secretary of State's office confirms their own security detail, but nothing about Marines. Then we've got infiltrators, Jack concluded. Hayes's people wearing legitimate uniforms. Classic false flag operation. He surveyed the gathered Marines with a tactical eye. About 20 of them strategically positioned. They'll move when the ceremony is fully underway, maximum cameras, maximum chaos. We need to evacuate, Singh insisted. Jack shook his head. No time, and they just intercept the boats. We need to expose them before they can act. His mind raced through options. The Titans, can they broadcast their neural communication to everyone at once? Make it impossible to deny what's happening. Singh consulted briefly with Eleanor, who nodded excitedly. They've been practicing wider broadcasts with us. The elder believes it's possible, especially with all of them working in concert. Then we need to force Hayes's hand, Jack decided. Make him reveal himself before he's ready. Singh looked skeptical. How do we do that? Jack's weathered face creased into a smile that held no humor. By giving him exactly what he wants. Me. The recognition ceremony began with dignified formality. Delegates from 12 nations took their places on the platform. Camera crews positioned themselves for the historic broadcast. The Titans gathered in formation near the shore, their bioluminescent patterns synchronized in elaborate displays that even untrained human eyes could recognize as deliberate communication. Jack Mason stood slightly apart near the edge of the platform where land met water. He had removed the clean shirt provided by the UN team, returning to his worn maintenance uniform from Horizon Station, a silent statement about his allegiance to working people rather than authorities. From this position, he had a clear view of the disguised operators among the Marine contingent. Their body language had shifted subtly as the ceremony began, the almost imperceptible tension of men preparing for action. Jack had seen it countless times before missions had felt it in his own body during the years he led SEAL teams into hostile territory. Dr. Amara Singh opened the proceedings with a formal address about the historic nature of the gathering. Today marks a turning point in human history, she began. For the first time, we officially recognize that intelligence, culture, and the right to self-determination extend beyond humanity to another species that shares our planet. Jack tuned out the diplomatic language, focusing instead on scanning the perimeter. There a subtle hand signal between two of the false Marines. They were preparing to move. Jack caught Eleanor's eye across the platform and gave an almost imperceptible nod. Eleanor stepped forward when Singh concluded her remarks. Before the formal recognition documents are presented, the Titans wish to share something with all gathered here today and through the global broadcast with all of humanity. This wasn't part of the planned program. The disguised operators exchanged glances, their posture shifting from readiness to confusion. The Elder Titan moved to the center of the formation, its massive form commanding attention. The other Titans arranged themselves in concentric circles around it, their patterns shifting into perfect synchronization. The display grew in intensity until the afternoon sunlight was rivaled by the bioluminescent exhibition. Jack felt the familiar touch of Titan communication against his mind, but this time amplified exponentially. From the gasps and stunned expressions around him, he knew everyone present was experiencing the same connection. Images and concepts flooded into the shared consciousness of all humans, present the deep history of Titan civilization, their art and science, their encounters with humanity over centuries. The overwhelming impression was one of peaceful coexistence disrupted by recent military aggression. Then came specific memories, the capture of Titans, from their deep-water homes, the painful experiments conducted at Horizon Station, the genetic manipulation attempts under Project Neptune's Trident. And finally, with devastating clarity, the face of Colonel Richard Hayes giving orders for the capture and vivisection of living sentient beings. As the mental sharing reached its climax, a voice cut through the stunned silence that had fallen over the physical gathering. "That's enough." Colonel Hayes himself stepped forward from among the disguised operators, his cover abandoned in the face of such overwhelming exposure. His face was contorted with a mixture of rage and desperation. "This is a hostile alien incursion into human minds," he shouted, drawing his sidearm. "These creatures are attempting mind control of government officials." The false Marines raised their weapons, creating instant chaos. Diplomats and scientists dropped to the ground or fled toward the boats. UN peacekeepers moved to defensive positions, their own weapons now drawn. Jack remained standing, deliberately making himself the most visible target. "It's over, Hayes. The whole world just saw what you did, what you are." Hayes aimed his weapon directly at Jack, a lifetime of hatred and resentment focused into a single point. "You self-righteous bastard. You think this changes anything? These creatures are a strategic asset. The military will never let them go." "Not your call anymore," Jack replied calmly. "Look around you. This isn't some classified black site where you make the rules." Hayes's gaze darted to the news cameras still rolling despite the chaos, capturing every word and action for the global audience. His jaw clenched as he realized the trap he had walked into. "You set this up," he said, understanding dawning. "You knew I'd come for them." Jack nodded. "Some men are predictable, Hayes. They never learn, never change. Just keep making the same mistakes, thinking power means the same thing as right." For a moment it seemed Hayes might lower his weapon, accept the inevitable exposure and defeat. But 20 years of hatred and the certainty of disgrace if taken alive hardened his resolve. His finger tightened on the trigger. "If I'm going down, I'm taking you with me, Mason." The shot never came. From the water behind Jack, a massive form erupted with impossible speed. Their Titan, the first one, his friend, launched itself between Jack and the bullet as Hayes fired. The creature's armored scales deflected the round, and before Hayes could fire again, a powerful limb knocked the weapon from his hand. The Titan didn't attack further. It simply positioned itself protectively in front of Jack, its patterns flashing what he now recognized as determination and loyalty. Hayes stared in shock, his worldview crumbling, as the mindless animal he had tortured demonstrated more humanity than he had. Around him, his men lowered their weapons, recognizing the futility of their position as more UN forces converged. "Your choice, Hayes," Jack said quietly. "Surrender with dignity or give these cameras exactly the violent ending you've always accused the Titans of wanting." Something broke in Hayes' expression. Not surrender exactly, but the recognition of complete defeat. He stood straighter, his military bearing reasserting itself one final time. "I was following orders," he said loud enough for the cameras to capture. "Everything I did was authorized at the highest levels." Jack shook his head. "We both know that excuse didn't work at Nuremberg. It won't work now." UN peacekeepers moved in, securing Hayes and his men without further resistance. The ceremony's formal proceedings were abandoned in the chaos, but something more powerful had taken its place. The undeniable evidence broadcast to the world of the Titans' intelligence, their peaceful intentions, and the human crimes committed against them. As order slowly returned to the gathering, Jack approached the Titan that had saved his life. The creature's patterns pulsed in a configuration he recognized as concern. "I'm all right," he assured it, placing a hand gently on its scaled surface. "Thank you." The mental connection formed between them stronger now than ever before. The agreement. Will it stand? Jack looked to where Singh was conferring urgently with the gathered diplomats, many of whom appeared shaken by both the neural sharing and the confrontation. "It will," he replied with certainty. "What happened here today, no one can deny what you are now. No one can justify what was done to you." The Titan's patterns shifted to a slower, more deliberate configuration. "We return to the deep places soon, our home calls." Jack felt an unexpected pang at the thought. "I understand." A new impression formed in the connection, an invitation, a possibility. "You could come, see our world." Jack blinked in surprise. "Me, I'm just an old soldier, a maintenance man." The mental response carried what could only be described as the Titan equivalent of laughter. "You are a bridge builder, between worlds. between minds. Few humans can hear us as you do. Before Jack could respond, Eleanor and Chen approached, their faces showing the strain of recent events, but also determined excitement. The diplomats are proceeding with the recognition agreement, Eleanor reported. Hayes's interruption actually strengthened support. No one can deny what they experienced directly in their minds. Chen nodded. They're adding provisions for a permanent research and diplomatic outpost, a place where humans and Titans can continue to communicate and learn from each other. Jack considered this information, then looked back to the Titan. Seems like they'll still need bridge builders. The creature's patterns formed what Jack had come to recognize as agreement. 1 year later, the Florida sun beat down on the floating research platform anchored 50 miles offshore, where the continental shelf dropped away into the deeper waters of the Atlantic. Solar panels gleamed across its surface, powering the sophisticated equipment that monitored oceanic conditions and facilitated ongoing communication with the Titan civilization in the depths below. Jack Mason stood at the railing, watching as a familiar pattern of bioluminescence approached from the darkness below. Despite a year of regular contact, the sight still filled him with wonder. The massive form of his Titan friend, now known by the name Luminous in human documentation, broke the surface with barely a ripple. "Right on time," Jack greeted, kneeling at the platform's edge. "How was the deep?" The neural connection formed easily now, after months of practice and strengthening. Jack received impressions of vast underwater caverns, illuminated by living light of gatherings, where hundreds of Titans communicated in synchronized patterns of ancient knowledge being shared with curious young ones. The home waters are well. The young ones asked for more stories of the surface world. Jack smiled. "Maybe next time I'll come down and tell them myself." The specialized diving equipment developed over the past year had allowed him brief visits to the upper reaches of Titan territory, experiences that had changed him profoundly. At 61, he had seen wonders that no human before him had witnessed. Eleanor emerged from the research center, tablet in hand. Her work documenting Titan language and culture had earned her the recognition denied for most of her career, but she remained focused on the science rather than the accolades. "Luminous, perfect timing. We've decoded more of the historical archives you shared." She knelt beside Jack, her excitement evident. "The patterns describing your ancestral migration from the hydrothermal vents, it's revolutionizing our understanding of evolutionary biology." Luminous's patterns shifted in what they now recognize as pleasure at sharing knowledge. From the research center's doorway, Chen called out, "Jack, incoming transmission from Singh. The UN Security Council vote is happening." Jack nodded, giving Luminous a parting touch before heading inside. The cool interior of the research center hummed with activity, scientists and diplomats from a dozen nations working together on humanity's first sustained contact with non-human intelligence. On the main display, Dr. Amara Singh's face appeared, her expression cautiously optimistic. "Jack, Eleanor, the vote just concluded. The Titan Territorial Sovereignty Act passed unanimously. All deep ocean territories beyond national waters are now recognized as sovereign Titan domain, with protected transit corridors through national waters." Eleanor clasped her hands in delight. "That's wonderful news. The conservation provisions, all included," Singh confirmed. "No military vessels in Titan waters without prior permission. No deep-sea mining or resource extraction without Titan approval. And permanent diplomatic status for the Joint Communication Initiative." She smiled. "Your project is now officially permanent." After the transmission ended, Jack returned to the platform's edge where Luminous waited. The mental connection reformed as he shared the news. "So it is done. The agreement is complete. As complete as anything ever is between governments," Jack replied with a touch of his old cynicism. "But it's a good start." Luminous's patterns formed a complex sequence that Jack had learned indicated deeper philosophical thoughts. From enemy to ally in one journey around your sun. Perhaps there is hope for both our kinds. Jack gazed out at the ocean stretching to the horizon, thinking of the journey that had brought him here. From Navy SEAL to disgraced veteran to maintenance man to diplomat between species. Life had a way of finding unexpected paths. "There's always hope," he agreed, "as long as we choose to see each other as people, not monsters." The setting sun painted the ocean in shades of gold and crimson, as human and Titan remained side by side, bridge builders between worlds that had always been connected, but only now were learning to communicate. In the water around the platform, more bioluminescent patterns appeared as other Titans surfaced. Some familiar research participants, others new visitors curious about the surface world. Among them was the massive elder, now known to be over 300 years old, a living repository of Titan history and wisdom. The Elder's patterns formed a greeting to Jack, followed by a mental impression that had become a familiar question. Will you visit the deep places tomorrow? The young ones await more stories. Jack smiled, the weathered lines of his face softening. After decades of war and conflict, he had found an unexpected purpose in his final years, not as a warrior but as a teacher, a storyteller, a connector of worlds. I wouldn't miss it for anything, he replied, already looking forward to donning the specialized diving apparatus that would allow him brief visits to the upper levels of the Titan's realm. As darkness fell, the bioluminescent displays of the gathered Titans transformed the ocean surface into a living canvas of blue-green light. Scientists and staff emerged from the research center to witness the spectacle, their faces filled with the wonder that came from recognizing they were part of something unprecedented, the peaceful meeting of two intelligent species who had shared a planet for millennia without truly seeing each other. Jack Mason, once a soldier trained to fight enemies, now stood as living proof that the greatest victories came not from conquest, but from connection. His hand rested lightly on Luminous's scaled surface as their minds touched across the vast evolutionary gulf that separated their species. In that connection was a shared understanding. The guardian from the deep had protected a human in a moment of crisis, but the true protection came from the bridges built afterward, the careful, patient work of learning to see through different eyes, to hear through different senses, to recognize the sacred intelligence that could take forms beyond human imagination. As the stars appeared overhead, mirrored by the living lights below, Jack knew with absolute certainty that he had finally found the purpose that had eluded him since he'd left the military. Not in fighting wars, but in preventing them. Not in following orders, but in questioning them. Not in defending territory, but in building common ground. The Guardian had broken free, and in doing so had set them all free to imagine a better world.